as the night gets a little quieter. Welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you come here to relax, to slow your thoughts, and gently fall asleep. Whenever you feel like it, you can leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if these stories help you unwind, you can like the video or subscribe to the channel. Now, let's continue. I worked for a while as a mortuary transport technician. It wasn't a job I ever imagined myself doing when I was younger, but life has a way of pushing you into strange directions. The work itself was straightforward, at least on paper. My job was to transport the deceased from wherever they were to wherever they needed to go next. Hospitals, nursing homes, private residences, funeral homes, medical examiners, and sometimes places for scientific donation. It sounds simple when you say it that way, but what most people don't realize is that dead people can have a lot of appointments. There was a rhythm to the job. Calls would come in at all hours, sometimes during the day, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the early hours of the morning when the world feels half asleep. You learn to move quietly, respectfully, and efficiently. You learned how to navigate buildings most people never see at night. You learned which hallways echoed, which doors creaked, and which lights flickered if you stood under them too long. Despite what people might assume, most of the job was not creepy. It was quiet, yes. Sometimes emotionally heavy, yes, but not frightening. The dead themselves were never scary to me. If anything, they felt peaceful. Still, finished with whatever struggles they had been carrying. The unsettling part, if there was one, came from the places you went and the hours you worked. One night, I was assigned to transport someone to a science donation facility. This was where people who had chosen to donate their bodies to science were taken. Once they arrived there, the process was out of my hands. My responsibility ended with getting them inside, documented, and placed where they needed to be. The drop-off happened late, around 1 in the morning. That wasn't unusual. Most of my science donation runs happened at night. The facility was quiet, industrial, and clinical. No windows, long hallways, fluorescent lighting that made everything look pale and flat. It wasn't a place meant for comfort. It was meant for efficiency. I wheeled the deceased inside on the gurney and unlocked the large freezer where the bodies were stored. Everything inside was organized. Shelves ran along the walls, and once remains were processed, most of them were wrapped in this distinctive blue tape-like material. It wasn't meant to hide anything. In fact, you could clearly tell what was inside each package. Legs, arms, hands, feet, segments of people, neatly wrapped and labeled. At the time, I found it oddly interesting. Not in a morbid way, just in a factual one. This was science. This was anatomy. This was the human body reduced to components that could teach future doctors and researchers. After a while, things like that stop shocking you. They just become part of the environment. I placed the man I had brought in onto the board, used the lift, and slid him carefully onto the shelf. I double-checked everything like I always did. Documentation, placement, security. Then I shut the freezer door and locked it. The science drop-off and processing area was shaped like a large L. The freezer was located in the longer section of the space. Once you finished there, you turned a corner into another area with desks, filing cabinets, and administrative equipment. From there, you could wheel the empty gurney back toward the garage door where the van was parked. I turned the corner, pushing the gurney in front of me, and nearly had a heart attack. Standing there, in front of one of the file cabinets, was a man. Not a shadow. Not a reflection. Not someone partially hidden. A full person, standing upright, examining files inside an open drawer. He looked completely normal, like you or me. He was dressed in modern clothes, not scrubs, not a lab coat, not a uniform. What struck me immediately was that he didn't look like anyone who should have been back there. People who worked in that area had a certain look, badges, specific clothing, familiar faces. This guy didn't match any of that. And more importantly, I had never seen anyone there that late before. Ever. For a split second, my body reacted before my brain did. My heart jumped. My grip tightened on the gurney, and I felt that sudden rush of adrenaline you get when you're startled badly. It took me a moment to steady myself. I laughed a little, mostly out of nerves, and said something like, "You'll have to forgive me. You almost gave me a heart attack." He didn't respond. He didn't turn around. He didn't look at me. He didn't even seem to register that I had spoken. He just stood there, staring at the open file in front of him, completely absorbed. I figured maybe he hadn't heard me. The building had a hum to it. Ventilation systems, refrigeration units, distant machinery. It wasn't unreasonable to think he might have missed what I said. So I spoke again. I apologized for being startled and said I'd just be finishing up and heading out. Again, no response. Not even a shift in posture. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink noticeably. He just kept looking at the file. At this point, I started to feel uneasy, but not afraid. More confused than anything. I thought maybe he was deaf, or deeply focused, or socially awkward. Or maybe he was some overnight administrative staff member I hadn't met yet. I decided not to push it. I finished wheeling the gurney back to the van, loaded it inside, and closed the large garage door from the inside. The entire time, the man remained exactly where he was. Same position, same open file, same complete lack of acknowledgement. Before leaving, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. It was down the hall, past the administrative area. I didn't want to just disappear without saying anything, so I told him I was going to the restroom and would be right back. Again, no response. I remember thinking, maybe he really can't hear me. Maybe he's just working and ignoring everything else. So I went to the bathroom, did what I needed to do, and headed back toward the garage area to finish locking up. That's when things became truly strange. The man was gone. The file cabinet drawer he had been examining was still open. The file was still sitting there, exactly as he had left it. But he himself was nowhere to be seen. I stopped and listened. The hallway was silent. I hadn't heard any footsteps while I was in the bathroom. I hadn't heard a door open or close. The only way out of that area would have required him to walk past the bathroom, or through a door I would have heard. I checked the surrounding rooms. Empty. I checked the hallway. Empty. There was no sign that anyone had been there at all, aside from the open file cabinet. A chill ran through me, not sharp, but slow and creeping. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe he had moved quietly. Maybe he knew another exit I didn't. Maybe he was staff and just didn't care to interact. Still, something felt off. I double-checked everything I was responsible for. The freezer was locked. The doors were secure. Nothing had been disturbed. Everything was exactly as it should be. Before leaving, I announced out loud that I was locking up and setting the alarm, just in case the man was somewhere nearby and needed to hear it. No response. I set the alarm, locked the building, got into the van, and left. I drove away feeling unsettled in a way that stuck with me. Not terrified, not panicked, just deeply unsettled. The kind of feeling that doesn't fade immediately. The kind that makes you replay details over and over in your head. Who was he? Why didn't he respond? How did he leave without making a sound? Why was he there at 1 in the morning, and why, out of all places, was he examining files in a building full of the dead? I never got answers to those questions. No one ever mentioned an overnight worker matching that description. No one ever said they'd been there late. I never saw him again. I've had other strange moments during my time in that job. Odd feelings, unexplainable sounds. Moments where places felt heavier than they should have. But nothing else came close to that night. Even now, years later, I can picture it perfectly. The lighting, the silence, the way he stood there utterly indifferent to my presence, the open file cabinet, the emptiness afterward. I don't know who he was, or what he was, or why he was there. I just know that some experiences don't ask to be explained. They simply sit with you, waiting, like an unanswered question you carry for the rest of your life. And that is one of mine. I have a few other memories from that job if anyone ever wants to hear them. None of them are quite like that one, though. Whenever I went to my dad's house when I was around 13, there was a stretch of road we always passed that I never really thought about. It was just part of the route, one of those places you see over and over until it becomes invisible. Around the corner of a quiet neighborhood, there was a community garden, neat rows of plants, a small fence, people tending it sometimes. It felt ordinary, harmless, almost comforting in a way. Most of the time, my dad drove us from my mom's place to his, but one week his car was in the shop, so my mom was the one driving. We were passing the garden like always, and she casually mentioned that there used to be a house there. That caught my attention. I asked her what happened to it. She didn't pause or lower her voice. She didn't seem to think it was a big deal. She just told me, plainly, that an old man had lived there. He was in a wheelchair. One day, the house caught on fire, and he burned inside before he could get out. Paramedics couldn't save him. That was it. She said it the way people sometimes talk about sad facts they've already processed. No drama, no buildup, just information. Then she kept driving. At the time, I remember thinking, okay, that's awful. But my reaction was muted. I was 13. Death was still something distant to me, something that happened to old people or strangers, not something you sat with and truly imagined. I looked out the window at the garden and tried to picture a house there, but it didn't fully register. It wasn't until later that it hit me. Not all at once, but slowly, in pieces. I started thinking about what it actually meant. I was told later that it had been a 2-story house. I don't know if that detail is perfectly accurate, but even the idea of it is enough. A 2-story house, an old man, a wheelchair, a fire. Once you really let yourself imagine it, it becomes unbearable. Picture being in your late 60s or 70s. Your body already doesn't move the way it used to. Every motion takes effort. Pain is part of daily life. You rely on routines, on familiarity, on knowing exactly where things are because sudden change is hard. Your house isn't just a place you live. It's your safe space. It's where everything you need is set up to accommodate you. Then, without warning, it starts to burn. At first, maybe it's just the smell. Smoke creeping through the air, sharp and wrong. Your brain probably tries to rationalize it. Something on the stove. An electrical issue, you don't immediately think, this is it. You don't immediately think you're about to die. Then the heat starts building. Heat in a fire isn't like heat on a summer day. It's aggressive. It presses in on you. It steals your breath. The air becomes thick, heavy, hard to pull into your lungs. Every inhale burns. Panic starts to rise, but your body doesn't respond the way it would if you were young and able-bodied. You're in a wheelchair. You have to maneuver out of whatever room you're in. You can't just stand up and run. You can't drop to the floor easily. You can't crawl if the smoke gets low. You have to roll, and every second matters. If the house is 2 stories, the problem gets worse. You need to get to the staircase. You need to get to the lift if there is one. You need that lift to work. You need electricity. You need time. Fires don't give you time. The smoke spreads fast. It fills rooms. It eats oxygen. Your eyes burn. Tears stream down your face, not from emotion, but from pain and instinct. Your lungs start to scream before your mouth does. Imagine trying to stay calm enough to control a wheelchair while your survival instincts are screaming at you to move faster than your body allows. Imagine reaching the staircase and realizing you're still too far, or the lift isn't responding, or the power has already gone out. Imagine knowing, in a quiet but unmistakable way, that help isn't coming fast enough. That's the part that gets me. Not just the fire, but the awareness. The moment where you understand that you are trapped. People talk about fear as something loud and chaotic, but sometimes it's crushingly clear. Sometimes it's the sudden, horrible certainty that there is no solution left, that your options are gone. Your skin begins to burn, not all at once, but in spots. A sleeve catches. Heat licks at exposed skin. Pain registers in sharp flashes that your brain can barely process because there's too much happening at once. You want to stop, drop, and roll because that's what you've been taught since you were a kid, but you can't. Your body doesn't allow it. The rules you learned for survival don't apply to you in the same way. Every scream you make tears at your throat, not just from terror, but from smoke, from heat, from the raw strain of trying to breathe. Your voice sounds wrong to your own ears, animal. Broken, nothing like the voice you recognize as yours. And the smell. People don't like to talk about smell when it comes to death, but smell is powerful. It's invasive. It sticks in your mind. The idea of being aware of your own body burning, of that smell being yours, is something my brain struggles to accept without recoiling. Your world becomes pain, heat, panic, and the desperate urge to escape a body and a situation you can't escape. There is no dignity in that kind of death. No peace, no gentle fading, just raw terror until consciousness finally gives out. When I allowed myself to really think about it, it almost sent me into a mild panic attack. My chest tightened. My breathing became shallow. I had to consciously slow myself down and remind myself that I was safe, that I wasn't there, that this had already happened, that I was just imagining it. Even now, writing this, I can feel that same unease creeping in. My body reacts before my mind does. Shan, what makes it so frightening isn't that it's some rare supernatural horror. It's that it's entirely possible. It's that it already happened. It's that someone lived through that exact scenario in a place I passed regularly without a second thought. The community garden looks peaceful, green, alive. People plant vegetables there. Kids walk by. Nothing about it suggests what happened on that ground before. The fire didn't leave a visible scar. The house is gone. The evidence erased. Life moved on. But someone died there in one of the worst ways imaginable. That contrast messes with me. We tend to think of danger as something loud and obvious, something that announces itself. Fires, especially house fires, are often talked about in terms of property damage, insurance, rebuilding. The human experience inside them is glossed over or reduced to statistics. But when you stop and actually imagine being the person inside, especially someone with limited mobility, it becomes deeply disturbing. It also forces you to confront something uncomfortable about aging and vulnerability. As a kid or teenager, you rarely think about what it will feel like to lose independence, to need help moving, to rely on technology or accommodations just to exist comfortably. The idea that something as random as a fire could turn those limitations into a death sentence is terrifying in a way that doesn't fade easily. It made me think about my own grandparents, about people I love, about how many homes are not designed with true emergencies in mind, especially for those who can't move quickly or easily. It also made me realize how close horror can be to normal life. This didn't happen in a war zone. It didn't happen in some distant, infamous place. It happened in a quiet neighborhood, on a street people still drive down, where a garden now grows. I think that's why it unsettled me so much. You never think something like that could happen somewhere so familiar, somewhere tied to routine, to childhood memories, to ordinary days. You assume safety because you need to. Because imagining all the ways things could go wrong would make it impossible to function. But sometimes a single piece of information cracks that illusion. After my mom told me that story, I never looked at that garden the same way again. Every time I passed it, I couldn't help but picture the house that used to be there, the man inside it. The final moments no one could stop. It's not scary in a fun way. It's not the kind of story you tell around a campfire to get a thrill. It's scary in a quiet, existential way. The kind of fear that comes from realizing how fragile life really is, and how little control we sometimes have, especially as our bodies fail us. Even now, thinking about it makes my stomach twist. Not because I believe it will happen to me tomorrow, but because I know it could happen to someone, somewhere, right now. And because imagining it, even briefly, is enough to make your body revolt against the thought. Sometimes, the most terrifying stories don't involve monsters or ghosts at all. They involve ordinary places, ordinary people, and a single moment where everything goes wrong and there is no escape. And once you truly think about that, it's hard to unthink it. My mom told me this story a while ago, and even now, every time I think about it, it sits somewhere between terrifying and surreal. I should say up front that some details might be off. This didn't happen to me. It happened to her when she was a kid, and it's something she remembers in pieces, the way people remember moments that scared them before they fully understood fear. She grew up spending a lot of time at her grandmother's house. It was one of those old family homes that had been lived in for generations. The kind of place where rooms felt bigger than they should, ceilings were higher than modern houses, and everything carried the quiet weight of age. Nothing about it was obviously creepy during the day. It was just old, full of furniture that had been there forever. Objects no one really used anymore, but no one wanted to throw away either. Like a lot of kids, my mom and her friends loved exploring places they weren't supposed to. Doors marked, "Don't go in," rooms adults rarely entered, storage spaces filled with forgotten things. The attic was the biggest attraction. It sat at the top of the house, reached by a narrow staircase that creaked loudly with every step. It wasn't a finished attic. There was no insulation covering the beams, no proper flooring in some areas, just wooden planks, dust, and the smell of old fabric and dry air. To kids, it felt like a secret world. One afternoon, my mom and a few of her friends decided to go up there to play. There were no adults watching them closely. They climbed the stairs, laughing and daring each other to go first. I pretending to be brave while secretly hoping someone else would take the lead. Sunlight filtered in through a small window, catching dust particles in the air and making everything glow softly. That's when they found the desk. It wasn't something they remembered seeing before, or at least not something they had paid attention to. It sat off to one side of the attic, partially covered by old sheets and boxes. When they pulled the sheets away, they saw that it was an old wooden desk with a large mirror attached to it. The mirror was tall, almost as tall as a child, framed in dark wood that looked worn smooth by time. The desk itself had drawers built into it. Naturally, they opened them. Inside were pieces of jewelry. Not shiny, modern jewelry, but older pieces. Necklaces with dull metal chains. Rings that were a little too big. Bracelets that looked like they belonged to another era. To a group of kids, it was treasure. Something magical and forbidden at the same time. They started trying things on. One girl put on a necklace and admired herself in the mirror. Another slipped a ring onto her finger and joked about being rich. My mom remembers laughing, the kind of carefree laughter kids have when they feel safe and bored at the same time. They talked over each other, making up stories about who the jewelry might have belonged to, imagining fancy parties and secret lives. Then everything changed. Out of nowhere, someone started screaming. Not a quick yell, not laughter, not a startled noise. It was screaming. Full-on, panicked screaming. The kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain has time to process what's happening. All of them froze. They looked at each other, wide-eyed, confused. None of them were screaming. No one's mouth was open. No one was joking. The sound was real, loud, and coming from somewhere in the attic. For a split second, my mom thought maybe someone had fallen or gotten hurt. She scanned her friends' faces, trying to figure out who needed help. But everyone looked just as terrified as she felt. Then one of her friends screamed too. Not in the same way as the first scream, but in pure shock. She shouted something like, "Oh my God," and bolted toward the stairs without waiting for anyone else. Her reaction was so sudden and so desperate that it snapped the rest of them out of their confusion. My mom turned toward the mirror. She didn't know why she did. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was because the mirror had been the focus of their play. Maybe some part of her sensed that whatever was happening was connected to it. When she looked up, she saw a face staring back at them. It wasn't any of their faces. It was a clown. Not a cartoon clown. Not something playful or exaggerated. It was a face that looked wrong in a way that's hard to describe. The features were stretched into a wide smile that didn't feel friendly. The eyes looked fixed, unblinking, and far too aware. The expression didn't change. It didn't move closer. It didn't lunge or make a sound. It just smiled. That was enough. My mom didn't scream. She didn't stop to question it. She didn't think about whether it made sense. She ran. All of them ran. They shoved past each other, nearly tripping down the narrow stairs, hearts pounding, breath coming in sharp gasps. They didn't look back. They didn't slow down until they were far away from the attic, back in the parts of the house that felt normal and safe. They never went back up there. Not that day. Not any other day. The attic became off limits without anyone needing to say it out loud. If someone mentioned it, the conversation died quickly. No one wanted to admit how scared they had been. No one wanted to talk about what they had seen or thought they had seen. Years later, my mom still isn't sure how to explain it. She's not someone who believes easily in supernatural things. She's practical, grounded, and not prone to exaggeration. When she tells the story, she doesn't embellish it. She doesn't claim she knows exactly what it was. She just describes what she remembers plainly. without trying to convince anyone of anything. Because sometimes she wonders if it was a trick of the light. Shadows and reflections combining in a way that terrified a group of already excited kids. Old mirrors can distort images, especially in dim lighting, dust, movement, imagination. All of those are possible explanations. But then there's the screaming. That's the part she can't reconcile easily. The fact that all of them heard it. The fact that it happened before anyone reacted. The fact that it didn't belong to any of them. The timing of it, paired with the image in the mirror, made the experience feel shared in a way dreams and imagination usually aren't. When she told me this story, she didn't do it in a dark, dramatic setting. It wasn't whispered late at night. It came up casually, the way family stories sometimes do, folded into a normal conversation. She laughed at parts of it, shaking her head at how kids can scare themselves. I listened, half terrified and half amused. When she finished, I looked at her and said jokingly, "Yeah, fuck that shit." She laughed, a real easy laugh, the kind that tells you she's okay, that whatever happened back then didn't haunt her every day or turn her into someone afraid of mirrors or attics. She moved on with her life. She grew up. She became a mom. She became the kind of person who can tell a creepy story and then immediately go back to talking about dinner plans or errands. That's one of the things I love most about her. She doesn't let fear own her. Still, sometimes I think about that attic, about a group of kids playing with jewelry that didn't belong to them, about a mirror reflecting something it shouldn't have, about a scream that came from nowhere and made all of them run without fully understanding why. I don't know if what they saw was real. I don't know if it was imagination, coincidence, or something stranger. I don't know if there was ever a clown at all, or if that image was the mind's way of making sense of something it couldn't process. But I do know this. Whatever it was enough to send a group of fearless kids running and keep them out of that attic forever. And even if the explanation is simple, even if it was just fear feeding on itself, there's something unsettling about moments like that. Moments where everyone present agrees something was wrong, even if no one can say exactly what. My mom went on with her life like it was nothing more than a creepy childhood memory. I joked about it and laughed with her, and the day continued like normal. But every now and then, when I see an old mirror in a place that feels forgotten, I remember her story. And I think to myself, quietly and sincerely, yeah, fuck that shit. That happened while I was on vacation in Outer Banks. And even now, it's one of those memories that still feels heavy when I think about it. Not dramatic in the way horror movies are, but unsettling in a very real, very human way. It was 2015. We were staying in a beach house, doing what people always do on vacation. Waking up late, getting ready slowly, planning when to head down to the water. Nothing about that morning felt strange or ominous. I was getting ready to go to the beach when suddenly everything outside shifted. 5 police and surf rescue trucks went flying past, followed by 2 ambulances, lights and sirens tearing through the neighborhood. It was fast, loud, urgent. The kind of response that makes your stomach tighten even before you know why. At the time, my mind jumped to sharks. That summer, there had been a lot of shark attacks in the area, and everyone was already on edge about it. I immediately assumed that's what this was. Even so, I still went down to the beach. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe denial, maybe because when you're on vacation, your brain wants things to stay normal. Whatever the reason, I walked down like I had planned to, expecting maybe to see some commotion farther down the shore, not realizing how close it actually was. When I got there, I saw paramedics doing CPR on a man. Not in the distance, not behind some kind of barrier, right there on the sand. His body was laid out. People crowded around him, hands pressing rhythmically on his chest, movements urgent and practiced. There was no drama, no shouting, just focused, intense effort and the sound of waves behind it, which somehow made it worse. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes. That's it. 5 minutes was all I could handle before my body decided for me that I needed to leave. I felt shaky, disconnected, like I shouldn't be witnessing something that personal. I turned around and walked back to the beach house, my heart racing, my head spinning. By the time I got back, another ambulance went screaming down toward the beach, sirens blaring again. That's when it really hit me that this wasn't going to end well. I went inside and stayed there. I didn't go back out. I didn't sit on the deck. I didn't walk around the neighborhood. I just stayed inside, trying to distract myself, but everything felt off. The sound of the sirens kept replaying in my head. The image of the paramedics working on him wouldn't go away. A few hours later, my dad came back from talking to someone he knew. My dad had a friend who owned a house in the same neighborhood we were staying in. He had gone down to talk to him and see what had happened. When he came back, he told us the rest. The man I had seen on the beach was pronounced dead there. They couldn't save him. The second ambulance, the one that came later, wasn't for him at all. It was for his wife. She had been on the beach, too. After watching everything unfold, she had a severe anxiety or panic attack and nearly stopped breathing herself. They had to take her away as well. Hearing that made my stomach drop in a completely different way. It wasn't just that someone had died. It was that his wife had watched it happen, that she had been standing there while people tried and failed to bring him back, that she had lost him in a place that was supposed to be joyful, relaxing, safe. He and I had been there too. Not close enough to know him, not involved in any way, but close enough to see the attempt, close enough to feel the reality of it settle in my chest. It made the whole beach feel wrong after that, like the atmosphere had changed permanently, even though nothing looked different. We didn't go back to the beach for the remaining 6 days of the trip. Not once. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. No one said, "We're not going back." It just didn't happen. Every time we thought about it, there was a heaviness that came with the idea. The beach no longer felt like a place to relax. It felt like a place where something final had happened. People were still out there, of course. Families, kids, umbrellas, laughter. Life went on like it always does. But for us, it felt wrong to sit on that sand and pretend nothing had happened, knowing what we knew. What stuck with me the most wasn't the chaos or the sirens. It was how fast everything changed. One moment, I was getting ready for a normal beach day. The next, I was watching someone die. Not in a hospital, not behind closed doors, but out in the open, under the sun, with the ocean rolling in behind him like it always had. It made me realize how thin the line is between ordinary and devastating. Vacation doesn't protect you from reality. Beautiful places don't. The ocean doesn't care why you're there or how relaxed you're supposed to be. Life and death don't pause just because people are on holiday. Even now, when I think about that trip, that's what I remember first. Not the weather, not the house, not the good moments. I remember the sirens, the CPR, the second ambulance, and the knowledge that someone's entire life ended in front of a crowd of strangers who never expected to see something like that. It wasn't paranormal. It wasn't mysterious. It was just real. And sometimes, that's the creepiest thing of all. Back in April, something happened that still doesn't feel real when I think about it. It's not a story I tell lightly, because even now my body reacts before my mind does. My chest tightens. My hands feel cold, and for a second, I'm right back there, suspended between impact and survival. Me and my closest friend had planned to go on a hike that day. Nothing intense, just getting outside, clearing our heads, doing something normal. The kind of plan you don't overthink. We drove out early, talking about random stuff, already picturing the trail and the quiet that comes with being away from people. When we got to the start of the trail, there was a sign posted up front saying it was closed. That should have been the end of it, but we were young, stubborn, and convinced rules were flexible. We looked at each other, shrugged, and decided to try anyway. It didn't feel dangerous. It felt like bending a rule that probably didn't matter. We hadn't even gotten that far when a forest ranger stopped us. She was firm but calm and told us we needed to turn back immediately. So we did. No arguing, no pushing it. We got back in the truck and headed out. The adrenaline hadn't fully worn off yet, and that's important. We were still in that careless, wired headspace, laughing it off, talking fast, driving faster than we should have been. We were heading back down the road when we took a corner too hard. There was no dramatic buildup, no warning. 1 second we were turning. The next, the truck lost traction completely. I remember the feeling of weightlessness before my brain could even register what was happening. The world tilted violently, and then we were gone. We went straight off a cliff. Later, we were told it was over 90 feet. At the time, it felt endless. The truck rolled. Once, then again. Everything inside became noise and force and chaos. Metal screaming, glass breaking. My body being thrown in directions it wasn't meant to go. Then there was the water. We hit the lake at the bottom. Cold. Shockingly cold. The kind of cold that punches the air out of your lungs. The truck started sinking immediately. Water rushed in, fast and unforgiving. There was no time to think, only react. I came up almost instantly. I don't know how. I don't remember unbuckling. I don't remember making decisions. I just know that my fight or flight response took over completely. There was no panic, no hesitation, just one overwhelming thought. Get out. The window on my side was down. That's the only reason I'm here. I swam out through it, water burning my lungs, and pushed myself toward the surface. When I broke through the water, I sucked in air like I'd never breathed before and swam as hard as I could toward the shore. My muscles didn't feel pain yet. Adrenaline had taken over everything. When I reached land, I turned around and saw my friend. He had managed to get out too and was on top of the truck as it continued to sink. I yelled for him, waved, did anything I could to let him know I was there. He made his way off, and I helped pull him to shore. We were both shaking, soaked, bleeding in places we didn't even notice yet, but alive. The next problem was getting out. The cliff we'd gone over was massive, steep, rocky, and unforgiving. Somehow I managed to climb it. I don't remember how my body did that after what it had just been through. I just know that I did it. When survival mode is on, your body finds strength you didn't know existed. At the top, reality started setting in. We had no service. My phone was gone, left underwater in the truck. There was no way to call for help. No way to explain what had just happened. We were injured in shock and standing on the edge of a road where no one was guaranteed to pass by. That's when something happened that still feels unreal. A truck came around the bend. out of nowhere. Perfect timing. If it had come minutes earlier, it might have gone over with us. Minutes later, and we might have been stranded for hours. We flagged them down, probably looking like something out of a nightmare, and they got us help. Emergency services came. We were checked over. Somehow, unbelievably, we hadn't been hurt too badly physically. Bruises, cuts, strains. Nothing that explained how close we had come to dying. But the damage didn't stop at the surface. We both have pretty bad PTSD now. Loud noises, sudden movements, certain roads, even the sound of rushing water can trigger it. Sleep isn't always easy. Sometimes the memory hits without warning, and it feels like falling all over again. We're working through it, slowly, day by day. It's getting better, but it's not something you just shake off. What stays with me the most isn't the fear. It's how fast everything happened. One bad decision stacked on top of another, ignoring a sign, driving too fast, one hard turn, and suddenly, our lives were balanced on whether a window happened to be down and whether another driver happened to come by at exactly the right moment. People talk about miracles like they're big, glowing moments. Sometimes they're just timing. Sometimes they're just a truck coming around a bend when it shouldn't have, but did. We're alive. We're healing. And every day after that feels borrowed in a way I didn't understand before. I worked in the kitchen at a summer camp all through high school and into my first 2 years of college. It was one of those jobs you stick with because it's familiar, seasonal, and easy to return to year after year. The pay wasn't great, but the environment was relaxed, and after a while the camp started to feel like its own small world, separate from everything else. During my senior year of high school, my cousin worked there too. He was on the maintenance crew. He was 3 years older than me, and at the time I really looked up to him. In my mind, he was one of those guys who had things figured out. He was confident, social, and seemed comfortable with who he was. Looking back now, it's a little ironic that I thought that way, considering he was a 20-year-old cleaning toilets at a summer camp. But when you're younger, perspective is different. One night after work, my cousin and 4 female staff members decided they wanted to drive into town to get ice cream. The town was about 5 miles away, down a narrow stretch of winding mountain roads. These weren't highways. They were twisty, uneven, tree-lined roads that didn't forgive mistakes, especially at night. They asked if I wanted to go along, and of course I said yes. The plan was already ridiculous. The car was a Corolla, and there were already too many people in it. I was fully prepared to squeeze into the back seat and basically lie across the laps of 3 women, despite the fact that I'm 6'4". It was uncomfortable, impractical, and unsafe. But at that age, none of that mattered. It felt like part of the fun. Then my buddy Lam asked if he could come. Lam was Vietnamese, which is why the name always made people pause, and he was a good friend of mine. Once he asked to join, reality set in. There was absolutely no room left in the Corolla. No amount of squeezing or poor judgment was going to make it work. So Lam and I decided to take my car instead. I drove a Subaru Legacy wagon. Even at the time, I knew it wasn't exactly impressive, but it was reliable and had room. We joked about it being a chick magnet, fully aware of how untrue that was. Still, it solved the problem, and we all headed out together. My cousin took the lead in his car, and Lam and I followed behind as we left the camp and started down the mountain. The road dropped quickly, winding back and forth through trees with no streetlights and very little room for error. The pavement was wet that night, either from recent rain or lingering moisture in the air. My cousin was driving fast. He would later insist he wasn't speeding, and maybe technically he wasn't, but he was definitely pushing it. We were keeping pace behind him, following his tail lights through the curves, the road feeling tighter and darker with each turn. Then it happened. There was a hard right turn, sharper than the ones before it. As his car entered the turn, it lost traction. We saw the taillights jerk sideways as the car fishtailed. In seconds, everything went wrong. The Corolla slid, clipped a tree on the side of the road, and then rolled, ending up upside down in a ditch on the wrong side of the road. It happened fast, but it didn't feel fast while watching it. Lamb and I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car immediately. The night was suddenly quiet, except for the sound of dripping water and the engine ticking as it cooled. The car was completely wrecked, resting on its roof. Glass shattered, body twisted. All I could think about was whether everyone inside was alive. We ran over and started helping people out of the car. One by one, they crawled free. Miraculously, everyone was okay. There were cuts, bruises, and a lot of shaking hands, but no one was seriously injured. No broken bones, no one unconscious. It felt unreal, like the outcome didn't match what we'd just seen. The car, however, was totaled. Once everyone was standing on the side of the road and the adrenaline started to fade, another thought hit me hard. I kept replaying the night in my head and realizing how close I had come to being in that car. If Lamb hadn't asked to come, I would have been lying across the back seat with no seatbelt on, half stretched across people's laps. I don't like to think about what that would have meant. The difference between being shaken on the side of the road and being severely injured or worse came down to something as small as one extra person wanting ice cream. To make things even more absurd, the accident happened in a state forest. When everything was said and done, my cousin ended up getting fined by the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Not just for the crash, but specifically for damaging the tree he hit while the car was rolling over. No one was seriously hurt. The car was destroyed, and on top of that, he had to pay for the tree. We eventually made it back to camp, quiet and exhausted, the night ending nothing like we'd planned. The ice cream never happened. What stuck with me instead was the realization of how easily things could have gone differently. I still think about it sometimes, about how confident I was, how careless we all were, and how a decision that felt trivial at the time almost put me in the worst possible place at the worst possible moment. It wasn't a dramatic lesson. No speeches, no life-changing epiphany, right then and there. Just the slow understanding, years later, that sometimes survival isn't about skill or intelligence. Sometimes it's about chance, about who gets in which car, about one small decision that quietly changes everything. This happened to me a few years ago, but it still feels close, like something that never fully settled into the past. It's one of those experiences that doesn't fade or turn into a funny story over time. Instead, it stays sharp, coming back in flashes, especially at night or whenever I'm near trees and there's a little too much quiet. Where I live, the forest starts almost immediately after the edge of the city. You can walk 10 minutes from streetlights and apartment buildings, and suddenly you're surrounded by trees. It's not some deep, remote wilderness, but it's dense enough that once you're inside, the world changes quickly. Sounds behave differently. Light disappears fast. Paths that feel obvious during the day become vague and uncertain after dark. My friend and I used to love taking nighttime forest walks. We were young, restless, and a little too comfortable with our surroundings. We'd grown up near those woods, walked them hundreds of times, and felt like we understood them. We knew there were wild boars and other animals around, which was exactly why we stayed quiet. You don't want to announce yourself in a place like that. Silence felt like common sense, like respect. That night, it was already almost pitch black when we went in. There was no moon to speak of, and the canopy swallowed what little light there was. The path was barely visible, more a suggestion than a road. We walked slowly, listening, placing our feet carefully. Our conversation had faded into silence, partly because of the animals, partly because the dark naturally made you more inward. Then we heard the drums. At first, it didn't hit us as something alarming. It was rhythmic, steady, unchanging. Not chaotic, not sudden. Just a constant beat, repeating over and over. The sound carried strangely through the trees, echoing just enough to make it hard to tell where it was coming from. Our first thought was simple. Someone was having a party, a sleepover, a campfire gathering. That forest was popular with young people, especially in warmer months. People went there to drink, make fires, roast food, mess around. Drums weren't that far-fetched. Someone might have brought them for atmosphere or fun. That explanation should have been enough. But something didn't sit right. As we kept walking, we realized we couldn't see any light at all. No campfire glow, no flashlights, no phone screens, nothing. The forest ahead and around us was completely dark. If people were gathered nearby, there should have been at least some flicker of light, some movement, something breaking the blackness. The drumming didn't change. Same rhythm, same tempo, no variation. We started walking faster, more alert now, scanning the darkness ahead, to the sides behind us. Our eyes strained, trying to make sense of shadows that all looked the same. The road beneath our feet was barely visible, just a slightly lighter patch of ground. Then the realization hit us both at almost the same time. The sound was getting louder, not gradually fading as if we were moving toward it, but closing in, like it was following us, like the distance between us and the source was shrinking no matter which way we went. That was when fear kicked in. Not the slow unease from before, but sharp electric panic. Our breathing picked up. Our steps became uneven. We started talking, fast and overlapping, voices low but frantic. What the hell is that? This doesn't make sense. Why is it closer? What the fuck is this? The drumming was no longer somewhere in the forest. It was behind us, close enough that we could feel it more than hear it, vibrating through the ground and air. It sounded like it was 5 meters away, maybe less. We didn't wait to confirm it. We ran. Not a controlled jog, not cautious movement, but full, reckless sprinting. Branches slapped at us. Leaves and sticks crunched loudly under our feet. Any thought of wild animals vanished. At that point, being quiet didn't matter anymore. Survival did. The sound stayed with us as we ran. It didn't lag behind. It didn't fade. It felt like it was keeping pace, always just out of sight. Neither of us dared to turn around. We both knew, without saying it, that looking back would make it worse. When we finally broke out of the forest and reached the edge where the city began, the sound stopped. Not slowly, not gradually. It just wasn't there anymore. Streetlights came into view. Pavement replaced dirt. The world snapped back into something recognizable and human. We didn't slow down until we were far enough away that our lungs burned and our legs shook. We never went back after dark. Even now, years later, we talk about that night. We've gone over it again and again, trying to explain it away. Sound traveling strangely. Echoes, coincidence, adrenaline amplifying something mundane. But every time, we come back to the same conclusion. It wasn't our imagination. We both heard the same thing. We both felt the same shift. We both experienced the same impossible closeness of that sound. And the way it stopped the moment we left the forest is something neither of us has ever been able to rationalize. There was another strange experience in that forest, though it didn't carry the same fear. It was winter, daylight. Everything was covered in about 10 centimeters of snow. The world felt muted and clean, the way it does after a heavy snowfall. We were next to a campfire spot, one we'd used before. The fire pit itself was buried under snow. It was freezing, but the sun was out and the forest felt calm. Then we saw smoke. At first, we thought it was our breath catching the light, but it wasn't. It was real smoke, thin and gray, rising from the snow. A few seconds later, a small fire appeared, melting the snow away, as if something underneath had been smoldering, waiting. It wasn't scary, just strange, interesting in a way that made you stop and stare. There was no obvious explanation, no visible source. It didn't feel threatening, just wrong in a quieter, more curious way. Those two experiences alone would have been enough to make the forest feel different forever. But there's something else that has always stuck with me. Something entirely separate, but just as unsettling. Years ago, there was a school shooting carried out by Kip Kinkle. The details are horrific, and I won't dwell on the violence itself. What haunts me most isn't just what he did, but the moments right before it happened. The most disturbing part is that the vice principal, who knew him and was aware he had been expelled, saw him walk past the front office just minutes before the shooting began. Kip waved at him, a casual gesture, almost friendly. The vice principal was on the phone at the time. He noticed Kip and made a decision that, in hindsight, feels unbearable. He chose to finish the call first, planning to confront him afterward and tell him he wasn't allowed on school grounds. That confrontation never happened. Now, before the phone call ended, Kip had already started shooting in the cafeteria. There were kids who survived only because they did something unthinkable. Some who had been shot lay on top of uninjured students, trying to shield them, hoping that if Kip came back through, he would see bodies and assume everyone there was already dead. The school changed after that. More security, more barriers, more rules. All the things that come after tragedy. When people try to rebuild a sense of control that was shattered in minutes. What makes it even stranger for me is how close this all feels, even though I wasn't there. My high school English teacher had met him. She had been one of his mother's students. These aren't distant, abstract connections. They're human threads that make the story harder to push away, harder to compartmentalize as something that happened somewhere else to someone else. It's just crazy to think about how small decisions and timing shape everything. A phone call finished instead of interrupted. A wave in a hallway. A few minutes that separate normalcy from catastrophe. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing how thin that line is. How the world can be completely ordinary one moment, full of routine and small annoyances, and then irreversibly broken the next. Whether it's drums in a dark forest that shouldn't be there, a fire igniting under snow, or a familiar face walking through a school minutes before violence erupts, the common thread is the same. The warning signs aren't always loud. Sometimes they're subtle. Sometimes they feel almost mundane. Sometimes they don't feel like fear at all, just confusion or discomfort or a vague sense that something is off. And by the time you realize what they meant, it's already too late. That's what stays with me. Not just the fear, but the uncertainty, the unanswered questions, the knowledge that there are moments in life where everything hinges on instinct, timing, or pure chance. And that sometimes the only reason you're able to tell the story afterward is because Somehow you were just far enough away when it happened. This happened a few years ago, but it's one of those moments that never really leaves you. Not because something terrible happened, but because something almost did. The kind of experience that replays itself in your mind late at night, where every small decision feels heavier the more you think about it. It was a normal night, at least it started that way. I had just finished playing at an open mic. Nothing big, nothing dramatic. Just a local spot, a handful of people, some music, the usual mix of nerves and relief that comes with getting on stage and then finally being done. I had my guitar strapped to my back, my head still buzzing a little from the night, already thinking about getting home and sleeping. My hometown isn't huge, but it's not tiny either. The kind of place where you recognize streets and buildings more than individual people. Downtown has a few bars, a couple restaurants, and stretches that get quiet quickly once the night moves on. I was walking alone like I'd done plenty of times before. Not really on edge, not really relaxed either. Just moving through familiar territory on autopilot. As I passed a restaurant, I noticed a few guys standing out front. They didn't look like they were waiting for a table or having a casual conversation. They were clustered together, leaning in close, talking low. The kind of body language that makes you register them without fully understanding why. Nothing illegal, nothing obvious, just off. I kept walking. One of them stood out immediately. He was big, not just tall, but wide, broad shoulders, thick neck. A shaved head that caught what little light there was. I'm not a small guy myself. I'm about 6'1", around 230 pounds. I don't usually feel physically intimidated just walking down the street. This guy made me feel small. As I passed them, I noticed him mid-conversation, his head turning slightly as I went by. I didn't look directly at him, but I felt that shift in attention. The subtle break in rhythm when someone locks onto something new. I told myself not to overthink it. People look at each other all the time. That alone doesn't mean anything. I turned the corner into a dark alley. It wasn't a shortcut exactly, just the route I usually took. The alley connected streets in a way that saved a few minutes. I'd walked it dozens of times without incident. It wasn't pitch black, but it was dim enough that details softened. Brick walls on either side, a dumpster halfway down. The sound of the street faded quickly behind me. That's when I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was my own echo. The alley amplified sound in strange ways. But after a few steps, it became clear that someone else had turned in behind me. I glanced back, just enough to confirm what my body already knew. It was him, the large guy from the restaurant. He had stopped talking to his friends and followed me around the corner. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't looking around. He was walking directly behind me, his pace deliberate, unhurried, like he'd already decided where he was going. I felt that cold drop in my stomach. The one that doesn't come with panic right away, just awareness. I sped up. So did he. Not dramatically, not running, just matching my pace, keeping the distance closed. Close enough that the sound of his footsteps didn't fade, close enough that I knew this wasn't coincidence. The alley felt longer than it ever had before. My mind started racing through possibilities. Maybe he just lived nearby. Maybe he was going the same way. Maybe I was misreading everything. But my body didn't believe that. My body was already preparing for something else. I could hear his breathing now. That was the moment fear really set in. Not abstract fear, not imagination. Real, physical fear. The sound was too close. He wasn't hanging back. He wasn't giving space. He was right there, filling the narrow alley behind me with his presence. I thought about my guitar. It was expensive, not flashy, but valuable. Slung across my back in a way that made me slower. I'm more awkward if I needed to move fast. I pictured him grabbing it, yanking me back, slamming me into the brick wall. I pictured fists, the weight difference, the fact that even if I fought back, this wouldn't be quick or clean. I've never felt so aware of my own vulnerability. I wasn't thinking about pride or toughness. I wasn't thinking about standing my ground. I was thinking about survival, about getting out of that alley without finding out what he wanted. I sped up again. He closed the gap. At that point, I knew I couldn't let this continue. If I reached the middle of the alley, I'd be too far from the street to react quickly, too boxed in, too alone. I reached the end of the alley and made a split-second decision. Instead of continuing forward, I crossed the street. Right across, without hesitation, into the glow of a pub. There were people outside standing in a loose circle, smoking, laughing, talking loudly. The kind of casual public presence that immediately changes the energy of a situation. The moment I stepped into that light, everything shifted. I didn't look back right away. I didn't want to draw attention. I just slowed my pace, blended into the edge of the group, pretending I belonged there. Then I glanced over my shoulder. He had stopped. He stood at the edge of the alley for a second, just long enough for our eyes to meet. His face was unreadable. No anger, no surprise, just calculation. Then he turned around and walked back the way he came, disappearing around the corner toward his friends. Just like that. No confrontation, no words, no explanation. I stood there for a moment longer, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The people around me had no idea what had just happened. To them, it was just another night, another person joining the crowd for a cigarette or some air. I didn't tell anyone. I waited until my hands stopped shaking. Then I went home a longer way, sticking to well-lit streets, replaying every second in my head. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I woke up to news that made my blood run cold. There had been a robbery at a gas station, the kind that sticks in the local news cycle, because it hits close to home. The report said a group of men had been involved. They had been stalking people at the pumps, especially women, watching them from a distance, waiting for the right moment. One person had been robbed. Others had been followed but managed to get away. The description of the suspects matched the group I had seen outside the restaurant. Same area, same time frame, same kind of behavior. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a strange mix of relief and nausea. Relief that I hadn't been hurt. Nausea at how close it had been. At how easily I could have been the one in that article instead of just reading it. I kept thinking about the timing. If I hadn't crossed the street when I did, if there hadn't been people outside that pub, if I'd hesitated for even a few more seconds. I don't know what he planned to do. Maybe it was just the guitar. Maybe it was more than that. I'll never know, and honestly, I don't want to. What stays with me isn't the fear itself, but how quiet it all was. No shouting, no threats, no dramatic buildup. Just a man deciding to follow someone into a dark space and seeing how far he could take it. That's what scares me the most. Not the idea of violence, but how ordinary it can feel while it's happening. How quickly a normal walk home can turn into something dangerous without any obvious warning. I still walk at night sometimes. I don't want to live in fear. But I'm different now. More aware, more cautious. I notice reflections in windows. I listen to footsteps. I trust my instincts faster instead of second-guessing them. Every now and then, when I sling my guitar over my shoulder after a show, I think about that alley, about the sound of breathing behind me. about the moment I stepped into the light and everything changed. And I remind myself how lucky I was, not because I fought someone off, not because I was stronger or smarter, just because I crossed the street at the right time. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.